Welcome to the KidMin podcast with Dr. Val and Dr. Virginia, where we talk about everything KidMin
and pull back the curtain on some of the surprises and challenges in children's ministry that nobody prepares you for.
I'm Dr. Val, and together we have over 45 years of experience in children's ministry.
I'm Dr. Virginia. Valerie and I met over 10 years ago in our doctoral program at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. We are excited to share with you all the great stuff that we have picked up over the years. We want to minister to you, the children's minister.
Welcome, friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. Dr. Virginia and I thought that we would talk about a topic that is very timely because for us, if you've heard us speak about Vacation Bible School before, you know that both of us really begin planning VBS in January, February. We're kicking off our training events in March and April for certain things. So this is really the time of year to start talking about Vacation Bible School.
Absolutely. Yes. I've already had my first kind of meeting with some key leaders. We are hosting a regional training event for our area tomorrow. And so we are definitely in full VBS swing for sure.
Love VBS training events.
Giant butterfly kites just like hanging out in my office right now. So they'll eventually make it into storage, but they're just kind of hanging out with me. So
you've heard us talk about it before. We love Vacation Bible School. I think it is the most effective event that we have in children's ministry, really for the church for the whole year, because you get the opportunity to reach out to your community. You get to reach out to so many families. You get to have members of your church volunteer in the children's ministry that do not usually hang out in the children's ministry. So you really, I think it brings the church together. So there's so many great things about Vacation Bible School. And so what we really thought we would talk about today, we have done episodes before about planning VBS, about a year-long plan for planning VBS, because it really is something that takes you really all year to prepare for if you're doing it a little bit at a time so that you're not crushed right there before it begins. But so we've talked about a few different things, how to do outreach in your community, and we've mentioned safety and security before in small sections within these larger Vacation Bible School topics. But we thought today that as you are getting ready to plan your Vacation Bible School, that this might be helpful information for you, especially if this is a new thing for you, if your church has not done VBS before, or if you're a new children's minister just coming in, that would hopefully give you some ideas, some thoughts of things to be thinking about on how to prepare your church for VBS safety and security. The first thing that I'd like to mention is that you really do need to take a minute to look at your insurance policy that you have for your church and for your children's ministry. Different insurance companies require different things for special events in your church, in your facility, in your ministry. And so you want to make sure that you are covering all of the bases with your insurance company. You might need an extra rider for that large of an event. You know, they may not include Vacation Bible School just in the regular policy. So you do want to check and see if that's worded in that way. And then also a lot of times your insurance company will have specific things that they request you do when you're having a special event. So you want to make sure you are super familiar with that.
Yeah. And especially if maybe you're having like a celebration at the end of the week and you're going to have bounce houses or maybe some sort of element like that would cause some extra liability or need you to take extra procedures or precautions or that kind of thing. Yeah.
The great thing too is if you are struggling with getting your church on board with safety and security policies, which can happen a lot. I've worked with a lot of churches that have a hard time because a lot of times church members just want to say, you know, we've known each other forever. Everybody's familiar with each other. There's no reason to
We've
worry
always
about these
done
things.
it this way.
Your insurance company can help you a lot with that because a lot of times your insurance company will require things like background checks or,
Mhm.
certain forms that have to be filled out and that kind of thing. So it could really be to your benefit to make sure you're able to say, well, you know what? Our insurance company requires us to do this. And a
Mhm.
lot of times that will click into people's understanding
Mhm.
a little bit easier than you coming in and saying, we're starting off this new policy. So
Mhm.
insurance companies can be our friends sometimes.
I was gonna say, let them be the bad guy.
Another thing that I think is incredibly helpful for you as a children's minister, being in charge of this large event, is to create one of the very first teams that I like to create is a security team. And this would be if your church already has a security team, then you would want to go and meet with the person that's in charge of your security and talk with them. But if you are a smaller church or if your church has not created a security team, this is a great time for you to bring in some extra help during this time in your ministry. So you might find some of your church leaders, your deacons or your elders, people that might be familiar with security. If you have any
Mhm.
police
Mhm.
officers in your congregation,
Mhm.
if you have any military, any
Mhm.
people that are very used to safety and security policies, to bring them together to work up a plan for your vacation Bible school.
Mhm. Yeah, I am very fortunate in that I've served at churches with very robust security teams, which I am very, very grateful for, just because we've been either very sort of prominent churches or in very prominent places to where, we would just sort of attract just random people coming in off the
Mhm.
streets.
Yeah.
And so we've always had very just robust security, which I'm super, super thankful for. Um, and and we are also very fortunate in our area. We are in like in between military bases, and so we have a lot of military. We have a lot of former military or
Right.
law enforcement or retired law enforcement, and so we're very fortunate to have a very robust security team. And during the week of VBS, intentionally having them visible,
Mhm.
but they also, one of the things that I also very much appreciate about our security team is that they intentionally are also very, very friendly.
Yes.
They, what was it? I was trying to think. It's like they've kind of got like a name. They sort of renamed themselves and rebranded themselves
Oh,
from not
awesome.
just security, but also like the welcome team, the
Right.
security/welcome, where, they are, wearing their neon vests that say security. They're on the parking lot. They're visible during drop off, during pickup, but they're also giving the kids high fives as they're coming in, and
Right. Right.
to where they are a visible presence to
Mhm.
help parents feel, safe, like we are taking their
Mhm.
kids' safety very seriously.
Right.
But they're also very welcoming, so as to not be like an intimidating thing either. Like they
Yeah.
are here to help us and to take care of us and to keep us safe. And
Right.
so,
Right.
I'm very, very grateful for our safety team. So,
Right. Well, and this is another thing, we're talking a lot about like military or police officers, and we're not saying that you
mhm.
have to have armed guards that are in your parking lot or that are standing at your door.
Right.
Basically, what we're looking for, and this is why, like I said, having your church leadership, like your deacons, your elders, the people who
Mhm.
are in positions of authority in your church, a
Mhm.
lot of these ladies and gentlemen are r- really great to just have an extra set of eyes, people
Mhm.
walking through your parking lot, people that are
Mhm.
helping make sure people know where to park and where to go, but also
Mhm.
just keeping an eye out for
Mhm.
maybe
Mhm.
strangers that are wandering on to campus that don't have a child
Mhm.
with them, to keep, to be aware that these people are coming
Mhm.
in or going, just to have their, so if a child gets upset or if somebody falls or gets hurt, to have those extra hands.
Mhm.
So they don't necessarily have to
Mhm.
be security professionals to be able to be on
Mhm.
your security team, but it is helpful to at least have
Mhm.
someone that is familiar with how
Mhm.
safety and security can be done, to be able to be that
Mhm.
extra voice for you as you're
Mhm.
planning.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
if you don't have anyone in your church that would meet that qualification, a lot of times a community, you can speak to the police office in your community, and they have volunteers that come out and talk with churches about safety and security and things that you could do, so
Mhm.
they can help you create a safety and security policy if that's something that you're really struggling with, or your denomination may have somebody that can help you do that as well. But the
Mhm.
idea is that you have a group of people who are completely focused on welcoming people, helping them find their way around, keeping your campus safe, ready to call if there is an emergency.
Mhm.
Those people that are just focused on that, not doing a million other things while they're also doing that, but the security team that's just
Mhm.
focused on that. One of the
Mhm.
things that we usually did as well is to talk to the local police about traffic,
Mhm.
because I know that several of the churches where I served, our entrance and our exit were onto major thoroughfares in the city.
Mhm.
And so it
Mhm.
could cause some traffic issues to have so many people coming in at the same time, during the week at a different time.
Mhm.
A lot of times we would
Than
have
usual. Yeah.
police
Mhm.
officers that came on campus on Sunday mornings to help with traffic.
Mhm.
But it was also nice to have people to be able to help with
Mhm.
traffic as well. So if you are in one of those locations where you do have a lot of traffic going in front of
Mhm.
your entrance and exits, you want to make sure you're prepared for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Another person that we have built into our security team and that I also build into our VBS volunteers is some sort of medical professional.
Mhm.
We're fortunate in our church. We've got a lot of nurses,
Oh, yeah.
and then other medical professionals as well. EMTs or doctors or all kinds of different people. But building in someone to be available to respond if there is a medical emergency. And one of the additional things that we do with VBS in particular is as we are recruiting our volunteers, one of the questions that we ask of volunteers is, are you CPR certified? Are you first aid certified? And so we also keep a list of all of our volunteers who do have these certifications,
Mhm.
so that we know we do have a designated, medical emergency person, but then we also have a list of all the other volunteers. Like even if you're teaching crafts, like, oh, you're first aid certified, you're CPR certified. Like if there's an emergency, this is maybe an even closer person who can respond even more quickly.
Right.
And so having some sort of medical personnel available to respond if there is a medical emergency. So hopefully there isn't, but I
Right.
always say I never want VBS to be the place that we discover that some kid takes a bite out of a purple glue stick and they are deathly allergic to purple glue sticks. And we are
Right.
just now finding out. We want to be
No,
prepared to respond to that.
it's very true. That's one of the things that I tried to do at every church where I served, was to have a healthcare professional team that we made sure that there was at least one doctor or nurse that would be at each service time.
Mhm.
We asked them, to kind of to plan when they were going to be in town, when they weren't, when they were going to be there, because it's just nice to have that extra
Mhm.
help when there is an emergency, or if you do
Mhm.
have questions. And we're not talking about, we
Mhm.
would never give medication. We would never,
Right.
offer any kind of help service at all
Mhm.
during the services. That's
Mhm.
not the kind of assistance that they
Mhm.
gave us. It was just nice so that if we did have a medical emergency during
Mhm.
service, we had somebody there. But
Mhm.
also, sometimes it's just nice to have an extra set of eyes for a rash that a
Mhm.
child might have, that you might go, okay, is this something that might
Mhm.
be contagious? This is something that we need to ask
Mhm.
a parent to come and pick up a child for, just those little things.
Mhm.
Not that they're
Yeah.
diagnosing, but just to be able to help us kind of make those calls like,
Mhm.
"Oh, no, that's just rosacea," or, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's very helpful
Yeah.
to have just somebody that can give you a little bit of extra
Mhm.
guidance so that you're not, kind of like reacting to everything that might happen.
Mhm.
And so to have that voice there for Vacation Bible School as well is incredibly
Mhm.
helpful. So that if there is an emergency, there's somebody that can help you prepare as you wait for
Mhm.
emergency services to come help.
That's right. That can help keep you and the person who's having the emergency as safe as possible, in the midst of everything, for sure.
Right. Right. All right. We want to jump into something a little bit more complicated, and it might take us a little bit of time to go over. But we want to talk a little bit about pickup, drop off, check-in
Mhm.
system, all of
Mhm.
these kinds of things that have to
Mhm.
do with when the kids arrive and leave your
Mhm.
church building. When you
Mhm.
are working with the safety and security team to set up your handbook, to set up your rules, one of the things that you really do need to have is a very strong plan
Mhm.
for how children are being dropped off
Mhm.
and how they are being picked up.
Mhm.
And let's just start off first. One of the things that I think I want to start off with, and then I'm going to let Dr. Virginia jump into some more specifics, but having paperwork for parents to fill out for children to attend VBS
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
incredibly important.
Mhm.
So, whether or not you are going with a bus to pick up kids to bring them to
Mhm.
your church, whether or not parents are dropping them off, whether or not your church members are bringing visitors with them,
Mhm.
we need to make sure that we have paperwork filled out by the
Mhm.
parent or guardian
Mhm.
of every child that's attending. Even if a church member is picking up a neighborhood child, the parent needs to fill out
Mhm.
paperwork that's giving that neighbor permission to bring the child, but also that's giving us the vital medical information and emergency contact information and
Mhm.
pickup,
Mhm.
who's allowed to pick up and drop off.
Mhm.
Everybody needs to fill out that paperwork.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that I've been surprised about over the years as I've worked with churches and Vacation Bible School is a lot of times, even if they are doing the buses where they're picking up kids in neighborhoods and bringing them, they don't require paperwork. They literally just let parents drop them on the bus and take them off, which we just can't
Mhm.
do anymore. It's just
Yeah.
not safe for your church. It's not safe for the children. So even
Mhm.
if we did have that situation, I made sure that there were adults on the bus that had the
Mhm.
paperwork. No child was
Mhm.
allowed on the bus until the parent had filled out the paperwork for me.
Mhm. Mhm. And one of the things too that we do that can make it easier, especially if it's in the situation where one of your church members is bringing a neighbor, we have all of our forms are digital.
Mhm.
And so we can send out links, we have QR codes. And so like if, your neighbor wants to, or your a family from your church wants to bring a neighbor, they can always give the parent that form ahead of time, like that digital form ahead of time to go ahead and fill out and submit. Because we really push pre-registration. Obviously, we'll take kids, the day of and throughout VBS, but we
Right.
really try to push that pre-registration form. Again, it's all digital. Ours is done through our church database system. But I mean, even if you don't have that capability, I mean, Google Forms is
Mhm.
free. I mean,
Right,
anyone
right,
can make a Google form,
right.
as long as you have like a Google account or a Gmail or whatever,
Mhm.
anyone can make a Google form.
Right.
It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And so that is an easy way to get that registration form into the hands of parents is to do it
Mhm.
digitally, send it out via email, put it out on social media, have QR codes for people to scan. And so we found that to be, pretty successful with pre-registrations and getting those forms filled out.
Right. Even if you have a church member who says, I am dropping off, I am picking up, that doesn't necessarily mean that they know all the medical information that we
Mhm.
might need to know. They may not know allergies, they may not know those
Mhm.
special needs that we need to know. And so that's
Mhm.
why, I always really try to explain to our church family, I know you're taking responsibility to pick up and drop off, and that's perfectly fine. But I have to have a parent signature saying, this
Mhm.
information about the kids so that we are sure that we are making our surroundings as safe as possible.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep. Amen. And so one of the most important hallmarks for children's ministry at any point
Mhm.
um, is to have a check-in and check-out procedure,
Right.
to have some sort of means where, children have some sort of name tag or code. Parents are turning in some sort of, parent pickup tag or showing some sort of parent pickup tag
Right.
in order to match parents and kids. And VBS can just be an especially difficult time for this
Mhm.
because, if you tend to have a very outreach oriented VBS, which is what, I'm used to, what I have at, the churches that I've been at, you're
Right.
going to get a lot of families who, maybe have never done this before, who
Right.
aren't familiar with the processes, and this is all new to them. Or maybe not completely new because they're probably used to like going into the elementary school and like, they have
Yeah.
procedures. And so they're going to
Right.
understand that we have procedures, but you may have a lot of families, for whom doing this at church is like a new thing for them.
Right. Right.
And so there's a million ways to do this, and we'll talk about a few. But thinking through how you want to ensure that you do that process at your church and how you want to communicate that clearly to parents ahead of time
Right.
and do your best to prep them and to, especially prep your new families to VBS,
Yes.
so that they know what to expect during drop off, during pickup, and how that whole system is going to work.
Right, right. Consistency is key with this.
Mm.
And I have over the years done pretty much, I think, everything you can possibly do to match parents with children, because sometimes I've served in churches where we did have the budget to be able to have a computer check-in system. But I have also served in churches where we did not have a computer system. We were very small. We didn't have the budget for that. And so I've literally used note cards or little tickets or wristbands or there's a billion things you can
Mhm.
do.
Mhm.
This is what's important. Even if you are a very small church and you feel like you know your families very well, one of the things that I've always said is that we may know our families well at church, but we don't know what's
Mhm.
going on in their homes. And I've
Mhm.
had so many children's ministers call me in a panic because parents were suddenly getting divorced and the
Mhm.
divorce got really messy.
Mhm.
Or maybe they were having some legal issues with grandparents that had always been
Mhm.
allowed to pick up the children before, but because of a
Mhm.
health issue or a family dispute, they no longer want
Mhm.
the grandparents to have access to the grandchildren. And
Mhm.
you don't want to get yourself in the middle of family disputes.
Mhm.
A lot
Amen.
of legal repercussions to not allowing a parent to have a child if they're not if they have not been given some sort of court order protection.
Mhm.
So you really need to be very careful if your
Mhm.
families do get involved in some sort of a messy, family situation. And so the safest thing for you, even if you feel like, well, we don't really get very many visitors and we don't really have to worry about, every single church needs to think about a check-in system. And during Vacation
Mhm.
Bible School, especially because you are having all of these kids come, hopefully that you are not familiar with, and you don't know
Mhm.
their family situation at all. So the easiest thing is to have a system that everyone has to follow.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
grandmother that you've known for 35 years, your senior pastor and his kids and grandkids, every single person
Mhm.
has to
Mhm.
somehow give you something to show
Mhm.
that they have permission to pick up that child. And then you also need to have some sort of policy for what happens if they don't have that
Mhm.
with them. Because I'm telling you,
Mhm.
especially for Vacation Bible School, things happen because of work
Mhm.
schedules and family emergencies. And so I would always have parents come and say, Mom was supposed to pick up. She has the card. She got stuck at work, so I had to come
Mhm.
pick up. And so my policy in those situations, no matter how well we knew them, the
Mhm.
parent had to come with a photo ID with their
Mhm.
driver's license
Yes.
and
Yes.
see me or the
Mhm.
VBS director or whoever
Mhm.
I had
Mhm.
in that
Mhm.
position at the counter, and they would have to go show their driver's license, and their name had to be on the pickup form. It
Mhm.
had to be listed
Yep.
that they could pick up the child before
Yep.
we would release them, and like I said, it didn't matter if I already knew them, they still had to
Mhm.
go through that process. One, because it helps them
Mhm.
remember to make sure they
Mhm.
do it next time, but
Yeah.
also, I never wanted anybody to ever come back and say, "Well, I didn't tell you, but dad's, not allowed to pick up, and I did put it on the
Mhm.
form, and that was our policy." And once you have a policy, you have
Mhm.
to follow that policy.
Mhm. Mhm.
a court is going to expect that you have followed your policy. So you
Mhm.
can't say, well, I knew him, so I didn't worry about it. It doesn't matter. You
Yeah.
need to make sure that you're following that policy. So a check-in system, no matter how, simplified it is or how expensive
Mhm.
it might be, however you want to do it for your church, for your budget, it's just a
Mhm.
necessity to have that way to identify who is picking up and who is
Mhm.
dropping off.
Yeah.
If you haven't noticed, that's one of my soapboxes.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
That
Yeah.
is the
And
hill I will die on. There are
amen.
very few hills that, that I am so particular about that I
Mhm.
die on. And the,
Mhm.
check-in system for churches, no matter how large, no matter how small, is a hill that I
Mhm.
choose to die on.
Mhm. And it can be something, relatively simple. For VBSs in the past, like one of the things that we would do, each family would get, a couple, card stock, pages, little things, cards, with codes on them for their family. Just the code, not the family name too, because you don't want to put both
Right.
on there.
No.
And then they would be a matching code on the child's name tag. And the parents would get mailed those cardstock codes,
Yeah.
along with a little letter that sort of explained pickup, explained drop off. And so they would get that in the mail ahead of time at VBS. And so that was one of the ways that we tried to prep parents ahead of time, along with emails. Currently we use our check-in system to generate name tags, the sticker name tags for kids. And again, just try to email and let parents know ahead of time, like what that process is going to be.
Mhm.
And so I just think communicating, recommunicating
Yeah.
that process as much as you can ahead of time. That
Oh,
way
yeah.
people know where to go once they arrive, know what to expect. Try to keep it from being a surprise as much as you can.
Yes.
To try to help, especially those first couple days and those first couple drop offs and pickups, get smooth. Because I know with VBS, it sort of feels like, the first couple days are chaos and then you kind of get into a groove and then it's over.
Right.
So,
Yes. Yes.
and so it's like once everyone knows what to do, it's Friday and it's done. And then they're
Yes.
going to forget before
And then they're
next
gonna
year.
forget, yeah, and you're gonna start all over again, and
Yes,
so
yes.
and one thing that I always made sure was that I had a backup system when I did use
Mhm,
my computer check-in system from the church,
mhm,
because you never know when those things are gonna fail,
mhm,
or if something's gonna go wrong, or if you're in a hurry and you can't, work it out really simply, to
mhm,
have those, where I would just have extra stick-on name tags that I
mhm,
could use,
mhm,
that I could just
mhm,
number and do quickly, or,
mhm,
so that the parents have a name tag and the kids have a name tag and we just match it that simply. Um,
mhm,
they used to make, like I said, little wristbands with numbers that you would match.
mhm,
And so I think that you can still purchase those from some companies. And so there's lots of different ways that you can do it. One of the things too, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, is that having name tags for the kids
mhm,
is very helpful when you have allergies.
mhm,
Obviously, we don't put medical information on things that anybody can read, but
mhm,
if the volunteers that you're working with know that if you have a red name tag, then that means you need to check the
mhm,
form for an allergy alert.
mhm,
And then
mhm,
blue name tags means that, like, so that you have
mhm.
some sort of little, like, notification on the child that, oh,
Yes,
there's a medical situation here. You need to look at the paperwork. Um,
yes.
is very important. And
Mhm,
so having these check-in systems so that you can identify the children easily, so that you can identify the
mhm,
parents that are picking up, or the guardians that are picking up easily, that's all incredibly helpful to do. And there's a billion ways that you can do it. We've
mhm,
actually we have an episode just on check-ins and
mhm.
different things that you can use, because like I said, there's a billion of them out there,
Yeah.
and there's, and you can do it in a very inexpensive way.
Mhm,
The
mhm.
idea is just that you have something that matches the child and the parent or the guardian or the volunteer,
Yes,
that's picking them up. That's what's important.
absolutely.
One of the things that you need to think about with your team as you're planning your check-ins policies, your drop
Mhm,
off and your pickup systems, you want to think about your building and how you want to do drop off and pickup,
mhm.
because this can become very complicated. Because one of the things that I always
Mm.
tried to do, it's not that parents were not welcome on my hall ever. It's just that most parents, I would not have a background check on
Mhm.
or know them very well, especially if they were
Mhm.
visitors. And so having just free reign to
Mhm.
wander the halls to me
Mhm.
was never a comfortable issue for me.
Mhm.
So I always tried to have a very specific policy on how parents came into the building, how they could
Mhm.
pick up, you know, how that would occur, because
Mhm.
you don't just want people randomly walking around grabbing children out of classrooms. So you definitely want to have a way that you know that's going to work well for your parents to drop off,
Mhm.
because they literally just can't pull up to the church and just let people out of the car and just go,
Mhm.
because they have to have the tags that they need to pick
Mhm.
up.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
you do need to have some sort of plan for how the kids
Mhm.
are going to get into your building, and then also how parents are going to pick them up.
Mhm. Yeah. And you want to also have a plan for what would your procedures be if parents need to pick up in the middle of VBS
Right.
before the pickup time. Having a designated location for them to go to, a designated volunteer to be the one to facilitate that process and make sure it's happening correctly. Because again, you don't want parents just wandering in, wandering up to a classroom and like grabbing their kid and leaving. Like we
Yeah.
want to think through having that process not only for the designated pickup time, but also if they come early, if they need to check them out for a dentist appointment or there's a family emergency and they've got to come. And
Right.
so having those procedures in place and then also communicating them to parents ahead of time as
Right.
well.
Yes, there's a billion different ways that all of these procedures can happen, and what
Mhm.
works best for your church may not work best for mine, because our buildings are different, our numbers are
Mhm.
different. The layout of our building, in our parking lot is
Mhm.
different.
Mhm.
And so, there are all sorts of things that you can do. One of the things you do have to remember is that the more complicated you make the process, that's just harder for you,
Mhm.
because this is only gonna happen at the max 5 days, and,
Mhm.
it's so just as soon as you would teach a process to a group, they're gonna, like you said earlier, they're gonna not be doing it anymore, and
Yes.
so you do have to, like, have some sort of way that all of these things are happening in the most efficient
Mhm.
way possible.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
also, you don't wanna make it harder on yourself for it to happen.
Mhm.
Some years, I've been in churches where it was possible for the parents to come to the door and the classroom teacher be the one that would take the card and let the kids go, because of the way that our building was laid out. We would make sure that all the kids were in the classroom before
Mhm.
the doors were opened. There
Mhm.
was a specific time the doors would open,
Mhm.
and it was a very controlled from the classroom situation.
Mhm.
There have been some churches where I have been where we had kids in so many different places throughout the
Mhm.
building that
Mhm.
was just so complicated, and so we would actually bring them all back to the sanctuary and have, like, an
Mhm.
ending thing going on where there were games from the stage or videos
Mhm.
being played or something, and then they be called out of the sanctuary
Mhm.
to be picked up.
Mhm.
There's pros and cons to all of these systems.
Mhm. Well, and yeah, so I typically in my experience we have done either the everyone's dismissed from the worship center one of two ways, either directly to a parent or through a car line pickup, which that was one thing that was asked of us of myself and our VBS team to do a car line pickup. And on the surface, it makes sense because parents are used to it with, school pickups and that sort of thing. Um, we found the car line pickup to be very difficult and very volunteer heavy to execute safely.
Yes.
One, obviously, because of hundreds of moving vehicles and small children and everything else. And then, because of sort of the layout of our space and our parking lots. Um, we personally found it to be very volunteer intensive to do car line pickup. And that's also probably because our VBS was a pretty sizable VBS. We had about 400 to 450 kids, and the majority of those, well over half, 60, 70%, were community kids, which was wonderful, which is what we
Mhm.
wanted.
Right.
Um, but, you have to have a way to, match the kids to the car and make sure the people in the car are authorized to pick up the kids, and then to
Right.
get the kids safely to where the cars are, and to keep the cars safely away from the kids. And so although I have done a car line pickup before,
Right.
it was incredibly volunteer heavy and very intensive to make sure all the children, all the adults, all the volunteers were safe around moving motor vehicles, and
Oh,
then
yeah.
that we were still following the appropriate procedures of, matching kids to adults in the vehicles.
Right.
Um, and so that is an option. And I think on the surface, it can look good to, particularly to leaders who maybe aren't thinking through all the steps to execute it.
Right.
They're just thinking, oh, schools do car lines all the time. But
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
they do it for a whole year,
Right.
where they learn the parents, they learn the kids, they learn the cars, they learn, they have a whole
Right.
year to learn it. They have
Oh,
multiple
yeah.
years of doing it week after week to perfect their process. And
Right.
we're working with volunteers who do it for 5 days and then don't do it for another year.
Right.
And
Right.
so it's just a different process, I think, doing it in a church context.
Right. I think if you are doing the
Mhm,
pickup line, it does have to be a smaller number
mm,
of children, because I do
mhm,
think that the more you add into that, the more complicated
mhm,
it does become, and
mhm,
traffic issues and
mhm,
all
mhm,
of these things that, like you said, a church is not set up to do
mhm.
drop off and pick up that way year
Right,
round. This is just a
right.
1-week period. And
Mhm,
you do have to have, the car tags then and the
mhm,
matching and,
mhm,
bringing the kids out. And like I said, the transportation aspect of it
mhm,
all is very complicated. So I think you do have
mhm,
to think through these things and say, is that something that's
mhm,
feasible for me? Because
mhm,
even honestly, the thing about having the kids in the sanctuary to be picked
mhm,
up, again, with your numbers, if you're
mhm,
talking about a large number of kids, then you're talking
mhm,
about a lot of people having to wait in a line for the name
mhm,
or the number to be called for the
mhm,
kids to come
mhm,
out.
mhm,
And so again, you're looking at that's something that can take a lot of time. So
mhm,
if you can, I think if you're looking at a larger number, having something where kids are in different locations to be
mhm,
picked up so that you have a smaller space, for
mhm,
that, so that if they're
mhm,
picked up in the classrooms, that is
mhm,
probably a more efficient way for you to do it. So you do wanna
mhm.
kinda think through,
Think through what's gonna make the most sense. Yeah.
and kind of almost act it out in your mind, like, think, "Okay, if I
Mhm,
have, I have 20 kids in here, and then what's that coming to that
mhm,
door as opposed to 450 kids in one room, and
mhm,
then you're coming to a door,
mhm,
how exactly is this gonna translate to
mhm,
being the most efficient?" Because you do want to get them out pretty quickly. You don't want
mhm,
pickup to take an hour
mhm,
after,
mhm,
you wanna get your building cleared out as quickly
mhm,
as you possibly can, for
mhm.
not just for the parents' sake, but also just for your volunteers'
Volunteers,
sanity.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's tough too on parents, because if you're a parent with 3 or 4 kids in different classrooms
Mhm.
and having to go pick up in 3 or 4 different places, and then, you're getting an additional child in tow at each
Right,
place.
right,
So I mean, it's a lot to think through. And so
right,
whenever
right.
we do dismissal from our worship center, and we did this with the car line as well, having a designated like registration volunteer that the second parents start lining up, whether it is lining up to pick them up from the worship center or cars lining up in a car line, taking names in order of each family who's picking up. And then we would send that information to someone in our sound booth to be able to type up those names and have them come up on our screens as well. That way, during the dismissal time,
Mhm.
I mean, there's 500 kids and adults all in one
Yeah.
space, and they're not going to stay very quiet. And
No,
oftentimes the kids aren't listening very well
no,
for their names.
no.
So, one of the things, just practical small things that we would do, we would have, a set of maybe 5 names on the screen at a time. Whenever we would call children, we would say third grade, Sally Smith, third grade, Sally Smith. We would say the grade. So the grade level leaders would be like, oh, I need to listen. That's one of my kids.
Right.
Say the name, say the grade, say the name, repeat it twice. That way, even if the leaders are like third grade and don't catch it the first time, they know you're going to repeat it again.
Right.
So then they can hear it. They be, oh, Sally, that's you. Go ahead and go. And so
especially if you're looking at the first or second day, volunteers don't necessarily remember all the names of their kids. And so they're really relying on those name tags as badges. And so you really do need to give them grace to know that they're not just going to automatically be able to spout the names just off the top of their heads.
Yes. And so those are just really simple, small, practical things that we've done to try to help ease that, make it easier on our volunteers and who are a part of dismissal, and then make it, just run smoother by putting the names on the screen and just announcing it in that way. And so we're fortunate, obviously the first day always takes longer, but I mean, we can dismiss 400 kids in under 30 minutes, usually around 20 to 25 minutes. So just because you just go fast, and then we've got lots of people in our foyer who take the parent tags, and check them against the kid tags and log those parent tags. And so also we didn't get, it takes lots of, just practice too, to build up that efficiency and to figure out what's going to work for your church. Yes. And so one of the things we say is progress, not perfection. And so I don't know, there's never going to be a perfect checkout, but you can make progress year over year or even day over day in making your check-in, your checkout processes go smoother as you observe and figure out what's going to work well for your people, your church, your physical layout, your space, your families. So, yeah.
Well, and that's something that I always kept like a running list of things that I wrote down during the year, because I would tweak it and change it every year. And there would be times, and if I waited and I didn't write it down,
you'd forget.
Totally forget. So at the end of each day, I tried to kind of make my own little list of, okay, this is working really well. This is not working at all. Oh, we need to make sure we figure out how to do this a little bit faster next year, because it is a constantly changing process, because it's going to be different according to what you're using, and it's going to be different according to the parents, and are they all visitors, or are they mostly your church kids that are used to it, or those kinds of things. And so you want to make sure that you think through it each year as you get ready to go into planning for your Vacation Bible School. Well, this did not work great last year. How can we make this process a little bit smoother? And it's like you said, there's no perfect process. There's always going to be glitches and things that happen, but you want to try to make it as smooth as you possibly can. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so important to think through that, and to have other voices help you make those calls, make those decisions, because they might see something that you wouldn't see. Because the other thing you need to think about too are your volunteers' children. Because if you have, you need to have 2 adults in the classroom during drop off as well. You never want one leader left in a classroom with one child or children at the end of your VBS time. So a parent can't just say, oh, I've got to run and get my own child. So to have so a lot of times, sometimes over the years, I would actually have a specific place that would have 2 volunteers that my leaders' kids would go, because I so needed the volunteers to stay in their positions, but they couldn't leave until all of their kids were picked up. So that can cause an issue too. So you want to think through, how are my volunteers' children being taken care of? Well, Dr. Virginia, I'm looking at the time and I'm realizing that we have a lot more to talk about. We don't want this to be, a 2-hour podcast. So we are going to actually split this up into 2 different episodes. So we're going to break here for this week. We hope that this information has been helpful. We hope that you have learned some things that maybe you didn't know before, or things that you didn't think about that can kind of help spur as you begin to plan for VBS. And we would just ask that you would join us again next week as we continue our discussion on Vacation Bible School, safety and security. We would just ask that you would like and subscribe and all the things. And we look forward to talking to you again next week. Bye-bye.